This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewald, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Jerry Strickmatter. Jerry's a board member for Susquehanna Valley Center, and you have co-hosted before, Jerry. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Mara's on assignment, and it's so nice for you to sit in for. So today we want to talk about something that Pennsylvania has been caught up with in a major way for the last few years, and that is energy generation, and particularly from the Marcellus Shale fields in northern and western Pennsylvania, and the need to transport that natural gas, and that leads to pipelines and questions about pipeline construction. And so we're very fortunate to have with us today individuals who focus on that and specialize in that and are employed in that. We have both Scott Carney and Mike, Mike, how do you pronounce your name? Atchie. Mike Atchie, I'm sorry. And you're both with Williams.
Yes.
And you're both involved with community outreach.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, it's very nice to have you both with us. Why don't we start out with you, Mike, and ask a little bit about Williams and their history in Pennsylvania in terms of the company and what your corporate history has been in the Commonwealth.
Sure. Well, Williams is actually a 100-year-old company, over 100 years. We were founded in 1908. We are based in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but we have offices throughout the U.S. Major offices include our areas in Houston, Salt Lake City, Pittsburgh. And our presence in Pennsylvania has really come about because of the development of the Marcellus Shale. Years ago, geologists anticipated that this massive shale formation would yield tremendous amounts of domestic energy. And over the past decade, we are starting to see that prolific energy production from the Marcellus, which has brought Williams and many other companies in the natural gas industry to Pennsylvania. I actually work in the northern tier of Pennsylvania, and, up in Susquehanna and Wyoming County area, where we just recently opened a new office. We gather gas for companies that are drilling wells in that northern part of the Marcellus. We then transmit that gas into transmission lines and are working on some major projects now to move gas to other parts of the country. Due to the proximity of that Marcellus to major markets, it makes sense for us now to have that vital infrastructure in place to get that gas to those markets.
And knowing that that the industry is very important to us, especially for independence.
Mm-hmm. Energy independence.
Yes, yeah. Definitely. And being from the independent, state, it's true. Liberty birthplace. If you could expand on that, how this is going to help us, as a nation and as the Keystone State, to meet our energy independence.
Well, certainly, it's anticipated that by 2030. We'll see an 11% increase in natural gas consumption in the U.S. And that is great because now we have this ability to access these major reserves that in the past hadn't been available to us and being ideally situated in these growing markets. So we're seeing natural gas consumption increasing in the New England area, for example. We're seeing it in our major markets in New York City, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, these areas. In addition to that, we're seeing natural gas consumption growing along the eastern seaboard. Electricity generation is one area where we're actually seeing an uptick in natural gas utilization for electric generation. By the year 2035, we expect that all new electricity generation will be powered 80% by natural gas. So as we see that utilization increase, we're trying to hit that growing demand by that domestic production that's coming out of the Marcellus Formation.
Well, Scott, I believe that your company actually has 3 interstate systems throughout the United States, and I know you provide a good percentage of natural gas energy to both the nation and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Could you talk a little bit about that, to talk about the breadth of your company?
Sure. We're involved in many sectors of the natural gas industry, and Mike referred to some of the newer things that we're involved with in Pennsylvania. But we do operate large interstate transmission lines, and we're responsible for moving about 18% of the natural gas across this country, which is consumed in the United States. And the one pipeline of particular interest is the Transco system. And the Transco system is the system we've actually had in Pennsylvania since the 1950s. And it originated its purpose was to bring gas from the Gulf and the Gulf Coast up to the Northeast, Pennsylvania, and the large areas like Manhattan and Philadelphia. And we actually use that system to bring gas from the south to the north. Historically, that's where the abundant natural gas was. And it's quite ironic, as little as 10 years ago, we were looking at a proposition where we were running out of natural gas, and we were importing a lot of natural gas. And through the developments of an existing technology, which is hydraulic fracturing, and new technology, directional drilling, we've been able to unlock these vast reservoirs of energy in these shale rock formations. So the purpose of the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline is to take the existing Transco system and help turn it around so we can flow it bidirectionally. So we can provide same reliable, cheap natural gas to the southeastern United States, as far south as Alabama. And this particular expansion we're talking about will be the largest in the history of Transco. And it's going to provide about 1.7 billion cubic feet of gas per day. Now, to put that in perspective, that'll heat or supply the energy needs for 7 million homes. So it's taking our existing system that's been here a long time, operated very safely and reliably, expanding it so we have the flexibility to flow bidirectionally and take advantage of this new resource of gas in the Marcellus formations and Utica formations in Pennsylvania.
And I heard you talking about safety, and of course that's where viewers, everyone's always concerned about. Price is important, but of course safety. But in those 40 years, and we're broadcasting out to Pennsylvania, but throughout the entire system, can you talk about the safety records and what you have in place to assure that this is all done safely?
Well, again, we've been operating interstate gas pipelines for many, many years, and we've had a great safety record with regard to operation of those facilities. And we often have federal guidelines that we are required to operate under with regard to safety. And the one thing Williams does is, as a company, we not only meet those minimum requirements, but we exceed those requirements, because safety is a #1 priority for our company, and it's something we focus on very adamantly. And so just to give you some examples of a new pipeline, this Atlantic Sunrise, the federal government, or PHMSA, which is the entity that monitors pipeline safety, typically requires us to x-ray roughly 10% of the welds on these pieces of pipe that are used to construct the pipeline. Well, we voluntarily x-ray 100% of the welds. In addition, we'll hydrostatically test the entire system at 1.5 times the maximum operating pressure. And what that means is we'll put water in the pipes and increase its pressure well beyond what the pipes will be operating at under normal conditions. So that's another way we ensure that safety is maintained. In addition, we typically use higher class of pipes than we're required to use, which means thicker walled pipes. We'll bury them at greater depths than we're required to bury them at to ensure safety. So there are a number of things that we do as a company to help address safety, because it is such a #1 priority for us.
And this is a follow-up. I see you want to follow up there. And while you're following up, then let us know how deep those are, because when I've done some reading myself, I've been surprised about how deep these pipes are.
Well, sure, I'll address that real quick first. Typically, the minimum depth is 3 foot underground, and in some cases, if we're crossing roads or railroad areas, we'll bury that pipe much deeper than that. So a great deal of care is to make sure that our pipe is well beneath the surface in a safe, secure environment. And also tying up to safety, we believe safety starts internally. So we do a great deal of effort to make sure our employees are trained on the appropriate safety protocols and continually grow their education regarding safety. So it's not just a case that we hire staff and bring them in and train them, but we continue that education so that we're up to speed with all new regulatory requirements, and that all new safety requirements are met with our employees internally. And speaking of employees, I mean, we've grown dramatically in the last 5 years. A 450% increase in the number of employees based in Pennsylvania. We're over 700 now. So that just shows the dynamic growth that we've seen because of the development of Marcellus. hiring local workforce, bringing them into the industry, training them appropriately on the safety protocols, and then deploying them into the field, and then continuing that safety training regimen, which I think has been great for our company and the industry overall.
So you normally have 700 employees in Pennsylvania at present, and generally the rule of thumb is for every job in a basic industry that there'll be 3 jobs that'll spin off in service industries.
Right.
So that could be another 2,100
That's
jobs.
what's called that Marcellus multiplier, the impact of the industry spreading into other sectors of the local economy. It's been dynamic.
But when we talk about now, the Atlantic Sunrise project has generated some interest in different communities in Pennsylvania because I guess pipeline construction is new to many communities and new to many people, and they don't understand it. They don't have information on it. Jerry and I didn't have any information on it or understand it perhaps as well as we might have hoped to have done so until we did a little bit of background. But you must not, safety is not left up just to your company, but you actually apply to the federal government, to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for a certificate. Could you explain that process a little bit to tell people everything that you have to go through to ensure safety?
Sure. Whenever we're proposing an interstate gas pipeline, we have to go through a very strict regulatory process, which, as you indicated, requires us to apply for a pre-application phase with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And with the Atlantic Sunrise project, which Scott gave some details on, we are in the very end of that pre-filing and plan later this month to file a formal application for a certificate of public need and public convenience and necessity, sorry. And at that stage, we will then enter that formal filing application process with FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which we anticipate will be at least another year before we are allowed to move forward with that project, getting that certificate in order to build the pipeline.
But in the meantime, what we're doing as part of the pre-filing process is getting input from stakeholders. And that means the public as well as state and federal agencies. And this helps us to provide information so we can adjust the route accordingly. So we miss sensitive areas, whether they be cultural areas or environmental areas or population centers. And to date, we've already adjusted the pipeline by 1/3 based on stakeholder input. So we're listening to what people are saying, and we're adjusting accordingly. And of course, our goal is to avoid, minimize, and then when it's possible to do that, we mitigate for any impacts associated with pipeline construction. And probably the irony is we have been operating as good corporate citizens in the county of Lancaster County for over 50 years. Our Transco system has existed in this area. We provide 1/3 of the natural gas consumed by the state of Pennsylvania, and we've been a good corporate citizen having a 230-inch and a 36-inch line in the southern portion of Lancaster County. So there's a real-life example of what to envision when a pipeline comes through. And if you go to these areas, you can't even tell a pipeline exists other than the markers that were required by the federal government. Farmers can still continue to use their croplands. There is minimal environmental impact after the project is in the ground. And in many cases, we're victims of our own success because we provide this great, valuable service in a manner that most people don't even know exists. So it's really quite ironic when there's a lot of questioning or concern about pipelines when there's a real-life example in Lancaster County that's been there for 50 years.
But that's to be expected, and being involved in a lot of projects, they have their ups and downs, and having viewer input and other input is always wonderful. And while you answer this question, I want you to work into your website, because I know this is going to generate a lot of viewer interest and listener interest on our Voice of Pennsylvania radio station as well that'll hear this broadcast. So please tell us what those contact things are. You just have to say it once, and we'll put it up on the screen for our viewers. But when you're talking about 50 years ago when you did that, a lot of the people might not be with us now. So that's why you have interest. But what do you want to say, since you brought that up? What kind of things would you like to make sure that people know, about how much gas is going through in this last minute?
Well, the thing to remember is the first pipe was installed in the 50s, and then we have subsequent pipes as demand increased. But the thing to take home is when you do your maintenance and operations responsibly like Williams does, pipelines can last indefinitely. I mean, there are certain requirements we're responsible to do to maintain and operate these systems. and we've done so and demonstrated we can do it effectively and safely in Pennsylvania for decades. So this is, the Atlantic Sunrise is an expansion of an existing system that allows additional capacity, and most importantly, allows us to take Pennsylvania gas and move it to elsewhere in the country so people can take advantage of this resource to heat their homes, to power their businesses where they work, or to provide energy to turn on the electricity. And it's doing so in a manner that we're actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions because it's so efficiently burned and consumed at power plants. So we're seeing lower CO2 emissions now than we've ever seen in 20 years. And of course, if you're believe in climate change, that is helping reduce the effects of anthropogenic impacts on climate change. So, you know, it's from a environmental perspective, it makes a lot of sense. It's helping us achieve our clean energy goals that the President Obama outlined, and it's doing so in a manner that's unobtrusive to the general public, and it's doing it in a manner that's very safe and been demonstrating to be safe for decades.
Okay, well, we want to thank you for coming in today, talking with Jerry and me, and sharing this information with our viewers. And we look for you to come back in the not-too-distant future and give us an update. And we will be back with the second segment of Behind the Headlines right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions to make the commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States, and by Blackford Ventures, LLC, a private equity firm seeking to make significant investments in real estate, proven business enterprises, and their leaders. Find out more at www.blackfordventures.com. And by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to the second half of Behind the Headlines. In this segment, Jerry and I are joined by a very special person to share some very interesting memories and some interesting insights to Pennsylvania's government in a way that very few people can. We're lucky enough, Jerry, to have with us Donna Malpezzi. Donna, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Donna, you had served with Governor Thornburg for many years as a legal counsel, and then you went to the Senate of Pennsylvania, where you became the assistant legal counsel and then the counsel for the Senate majority for many years. And you had quite a reputation for longevity and for the excellence of your work there. What is it like to have entered retirement? That must be quite a shock. After how many years were you in Pennsylvania state government total?
36 and a half years. I started as a page in the House of Representatives in 1973 when Kenny B. Lee was Speaker of the House. But it's an adjustment. It's different. I mean, I can't say I don't follow what's going on day to day, and I'm forming my own consulting business to provide some strategic counseling to various clients who still do work with the General Assembly. So I'm excited about what's ahead.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And for our viewers, it's very important. It's a large state. If we were in Europe, we'd probably be 14 different countries. And in order to have everything go, you know, we have the elected officials, but then the staff behind that really is what what makes things go. So thank you very much for coming on today and giving us a little bit of, like the show says, behind the headlines, you know, a little bit of the behind the work. And in sort of a retrospective, are there things that you would give advice to the next councils coming in, or to the people who are starting off as pages as you did?
Well, I mean, I think being a political junkie is really important. You have to kind of love it. And, you know, it makes all the long hours and, you know, all the intrigue worth it because you're just fascinated by it. And, you know, I think what I liked was every day there was a new challenge, there was a new issue to try to understand. And, you know, I have to say it was exciting to be in the room where major decisions were being made, and every now and then asked, you know, for my advice in those discussions. So I would just tell people to stay the course.
Well, you certainly saw a lot of different leadership styles while you were on the Hill, Donna. Goodness, you worked with all the senators, from Senator Jubileer and Senator Loper to Senator Scarnati and Senator Pledgey. And do you sort of have a reflection on which leadership styles seem to accomplish the most, work the best? How would you comment on leadership on the Hill?
Well, I think a good leader has a combination of strong interpersonal skills, and they have to have a desire to understand the issues in some detail, not, you know, not a glossary overview, but an understanding in some detail, and a kind of commitment and passion, again, for the institution and for the caucus that they represent, because they have to bring all those interests to the table. You know, when you become a leader, it's not about you anymore. It's about representing the people that have elected you through the caucus elections to be their representative. And then I think the other thing that a good leader needs is a broad overview, that it isn't just about their legislative district, which of course is important and always lays in the back of their mind, but you have to be able to look out for the good of the state as a whole and what might be in the best interests of the state as a whole.
Yeah, so I think for our viewers it would be interesting to know too that in other states there's different styles, but all the legislators, Republicans and Democrats, senators and House members over the years made a great decision over the last half century, was to have a more centralized staff, an educated staff, not like from year to year bring somebody in new to run the education committee, or a new person to, you know, be the chief counsel for the Senate just because they won an election. That being said, would you say that this is a good career? I think we were all well served by that. I think that was smart to do that. Do you agree with me that we should be, you know, keeping that centralized, you know, staff so there's a body of work that they can refer back to?
Well, I think the House and Senate takes a slightly different approach on that. I think the House has really, truly centralized their policy and, you know, directing type of staff. The Senate still makes adjustments more regularly. You keep some expertise, but if a new member becomes chairman of a committee, a lot of times they'll bring in their own staff. So I think either style can work. You know, it might take a little bit of time for you to come up to speed, but the biggest issue is to represent your boss and then to look out for the interests of the caucus and really ultimately the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Well, Donna, the years that you've been in Harrisburg, you've worked with governors and on the executive side, and you've worked with legislative leaders and even on the legislative side. You've seen budgets come and go. You've seen some budgets that are surplus. You've seen some budgets that are deficits. And you've experienced the budgeting process in Pennsylvania a number of years. How has that changed, and has it improved, or has it gotten worse or stayed the same? And why should the people of Pennsylvania believe that we have a solid budgeting process in place? How would you reflect on that?
Well, I think that budgeting has improved because of better access to information. And then once you have that information, you have more variables, and you can also manipulate the data better. So you can present more options for decision making. I think the creation of the Independent Fiscal Office was very helpful in that regard, because now everyone is working basically from the same set of numbers.
And what year was that done?
That was the late Rendell administration, so I'm going to say 2009-ish.
Okay, all right.
And that Independent Fiscal Office provides background information that now everyone has access to, not just the governor. So that makes, I think, the negotiations occur on a more level playing field and ultimately more accountable to the people.
The other thing we have in Pennsylvania that's helpful to make sure that there is continuity and stability is that we have service agencies, legislative service agencies.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could tell our viewers a little bit about those and how they were helpful, or maybe your suggestions on how they should be changed.
Well, I mean, the Legislative Reference Bureau is a key operation to running the General Assembly. I mean, they take the bills, they put them in a standard format, and everyone has access to that service. So they're a key entity. And then, there are loads of commissions and, legislative service agencies that created over time, and everyone has their own special attachment to them. And overall, I think they do a good service. You have joint state, legislative budget and finance. They can do kind of intensive investigation that committee staff doesn't always have the time to do. So I think we're well served by legislative service agencies.
What about when we have good legislation, and both sides can agree that it's good legislation, Donna, and yet it seems today you can't go in, I can't go into a classroom and tell my students that when the governor signs a bill that that's the end of it, because it can be subject to state judicial review, and it can also be subject to the regulatory process. And good legislation over time, I guess, have you ever seen it be sort of transformed during the regulatory process and then not turned out to be exactly what the sponsors of it thought it might be?
Well, I think there is a lot of overreach by regulatory agencies, departments, in interpreting the language of the law. Unfortunately, words can be read a lot of different ways. I mean, it's inherent in the beast, so to speak. And when you're drafting, and I've done a lot of drafting over the years, you really try very hard to get the words stated in a clear, succinct, and obvious way. But I have seen instances where someone comes in with a different perspective, reads those exact same words, and has a somewhat justifiable interpretation. Didn't mean I agreed with it, but I could see how they got where they did. And I think we're seeing more remedial legislation as a result, where the words, you come back in again and further refine the language and address those interpretive issues as well as unanticipated circumstances.
All right. Well, we want to thank you for your services
Is
to the
it
Commonwealth
over?
of Pennsylvania. We haven't have enough time, Jerry. Not even close.
Help us out another time.
Yes, please
Yeah,
come
me
back.
too.
We want you to come back in a few months.
I appreciate that.
If you would, please, Donna. And
Very
thank
good.
you very much for your service to the Commonwealth. And
Thank
we
you.
will be back with a new show next week. We will see you then.